America's Remedy is a nonpartisan educational think tank focused on reestablishing America and her demi-sovereign states on a free and constitutional foundation. Our primary goal through education is to ignite a peaceful counter-revolution among the American people and to reclaim our lawful states and body politics, which were annulled by the Second American Revolution, also known as the Reconstruction Acts. Tell you a little bit about John. John is a husband, father of two. He took 2 years off of work in 1995 to study to try to figure out what was wrong with America. He's got over 19 years of study under his belt, and he's been involved in over 15 court cases. He was involved in 1997 in reestablishing the original de jure state of North Carolina. He's been the host of Tiger Television for 8 years, co-host of Democracy and Demagoguery. He's also been involved in numerous talk shows, a co-host on John Stadmiller's National Intel, and numerous other presentations that he's been involved as host and co-host as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and bring John up here. You guys give him a hand.
Yeah, again, thanks for coming out here in this weather. Normally I start these talks off with, why are we here? And of course, we're a preppers fest. We kind of know why we're here. How many people here, we look at our future, and what do we see? We see we need to prepare because things aren't looking good. By looking at our future, and by the reactions I got earlier when I was talking about that, what we see is how many people have a really good feel for America's future in the present political climate, direction we're going in. How many people agree that if you were to graph the United States on a graph, what direction are we going in freedom-wise? What direction are we going in morally? What direction are we going in financially? Okay. Does anyone see the present political climate changing that? Even if the Republicans are in. So the issue is and what we're prepping for is we're prepping for our future thinking there's no chance of a political change in the future. In other words, this is the political climate we've got to live with. And what I'm here to say is what we need to start prepping for, and what we're trying to do is, and what you're trying to do is, how do I survive? Because I know the political system's going to collapse, things are going to happen, we're going to have calamity, potentially. And also you want to be thinking about what are you leaving your children and your grandchildren? Because just because you survive, you do a great job, what are you leaving your posterity? Versus what did our founders of this country leave us? And what did they sacrifice to make it happen? I'm not going to ask for the type of sacrifice our founders did, but I am going to ask for people to get enthusiastic about America. Because right now, the liberal left is enthusiastic about America, and they want to take it. Illegal immigrants, enthusiastic about America. You got the rise of Islam. They're enthusiastic. This is great stomping grounds to come here and spread their faith. How many of you are as enthusiastic as those groups are about getting America back on its lawful foundation? And that's what I'm trying to get people to realize what happened. And the reason we're not doing it is because we put our faith in all the wrong people. How many people believe here that a politician will give you the right answers of how to get your freedom back, how to get us financially stable, how to get morality back? Where does that have to come from? Us. But we're all islands, and what I'm trying to do is make everyone a people group again. Let's make us all a people that we can go out there with our views and stand in the streets, demand what we want, get America back on a foundation rather than watching everyone else do it and we don't know. Well, the one thing that's missing to keep us from having to do all that is we don't know what happened and we don't know how to fix it. And that's what America's Remedy is about. What happened? How did we get here? Did it just kind of randomly happen, or did it happen very purposefully and very methodically? And there's ways to go back. And what we want to look at is whether it was done constitutionally or unconstitutionally. What happens if something's declared unconstitutional? How much force in law does it have? Nothing. If we can find that America was set up, this problem we've got here with the political climate was set up unconstitutionally, we get it back. And I want to excite you guys about, I know why you're here, and I want you to know why I'm here. I'm here because I know what happened. I know how to fix it, and I know the only answer, and I'm enthusiastic about telling people about it. I want you guys to know it, because the more knowledge out there, knowledge will forever govern ignorance. And the more knowledge you have, the better chance you have of getting back what's been stolen from us and hidden from us. And so what we're going to bring today is some historic. We've got to learn our history. What happens if you don't learn your history? You're going to repeat it. And I'm here to tell me if you feel that they got a really good education on American history in the public education system. And I'm here to tell you the victor writes the history. And that's what's going on even today. So, I'm enthusiastic. I want to get you guys involved. I think that prepping under this present political climate, all you can do is survive. What are you leaving your children? The political system in place. I'm saying if we want to thrive as a people again, our children, not just me, not just you, our children, our grandchildren, we've got to get a solid political foundation put back in place. Make sense? I mean, that's what we got to do. So to me, thriving and surviving isn't accepting what's here as legitimate and lawful and proper. And I'm going to show you why. We originally had a Christian foundation, so let's just go and see what our Lord has to say about this stuff. He says, Proverbs 16:12, it's an abomination for kings to do evil, for the throne is established by righteousness. And he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination. So if you got someone doing something evil out there and you say that they're legitimate when they're not, that's an abomination. Well, you don't call evil good. That's calling evil good and good evil. It's an abomination to the Lord. A king will remain in power as long as his rule is honest, just, and fair. Looking at the United States Constitution, how many people believe the current rulers are honest, just, and fair in relation to the United States Constitution? Something's going on. Well, what we're going to point at is the American Civil War. And I've got enough information to talk for days, okay? So I'm trying to break down. We're on YouTube. I recommend everyone go onto YouTube. We got a website, americasremedy.com. Go there, get some education. We're about education. Learn to fill in the gaps of what I'm not going to be able to tell you here. The issue goes to the Civil War, and there's two parts of the Civil War we've got to look at. And most people who know me, I always deal with Reconstruction, the Reconstruction Acts, and we're going to do a little bit of that today. But also, there's something in the news, and it was in the Raleigh News and Observer about 2 weeks ago, where a North Carolina representative by the name of Larry Pitman said the Civil War, the war was unconstitutional. The war itself was unconstitutional. And here's from the article out of the Raleigh News and Observer. It says, was the war unconstitutional? As Representative Larry Pitman said, you see, it's April 14th, 2017, so it's just several weeks back. And let's just read a little bit of what's being said in here, because does the Raleigh News and Observer have the authority to, find the best scholars, the best historians that can prove that the American Civil War, the war that was waged by Abraham Lincoln, was constitutional and lawful? An unconstitutional act. Let's just go to officially what an unconstitutional act. I talked about this a second ago. It says an unconstitutional act is not a law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. It affords no protection. It creates no office. It is in legal contemplation, as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Therefore, an unconstitutional act purporting to create an office gives no validity to the acts of persons acting under color of its authority. That's the United States Supreme Court case, Norton versus Shelby County. Okay? And we already know that. The unconstitutional act creates nothing. You have no obligation. But they are put into place and operated as they do until people challenge them. And that's the issue. You've got to challenge it. So now we're going to go back to, this is the Larry Pitman article, and this is what the Raleigh News and Observer says. But scholars of history and the law, including all the people interviewed, tend to disagree with Pitman's interpretation. He's saying the war was unconstitutional. He says people on both sides, mainly the politicians, simply miscalculated and mishandled a number of issues that, if approached differently, might have produced another outcome, says a history professor at the University of Arkansas. But once the Confederacy took Fort Sumter, experts tend to agree there was no going back. Have they said that the war is constitutional yet? Okay? Let's just keep reading, because these are the people who will be saying it was constitutional for this reason or whatever. But they're saying, well, once they took the Confederacy, there's no going back. Paul Finkelman, a legal historian who teaches constitutional law at the University of Pittsburgh, said the war was clearly necessary. Is that constitutional? That's necessary. By whose interpretation was it necessary? The President of the United States has an absolute obligation to defend the nation from a military attack, right? Finkelman said. And the United States did not make war on the Confederacy. The Confederacy made war on the United States. Okay? I was always taught that. It made sense to me until I started checking things out. Let's get a little historical perspective here. South Carolina seceded from the Union in December of 1860. December 1860. The war was commenced. Well, Abraham Lincoln became president March 1861. Fort Sumter was fired on in April 1861. So South Carolina had said, we're a foreign nation. We're out of the Union. We left. Several of the Deep South states, I think Virginia had not, North Carolina had not, Arkansas had not, Texas, I think Texas might have already gone, had not seceded yet. And North Carolina actually voted to stay in the Union. We weren't seceding. You know, we did that in March, I believe, of 1861. We're staying in the Union. See what's going to happen. Until Fort Sumter happened, and Abraham Lincoln asked for troops from North Carolina to wage war on these southern states. And they said, that's a violation of the Constitution. The Constitution says treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against the states. How are you going to pit one state against another state? How do you fight someone and try to kill them and destroy them and subjugate them to your will and then call them a free people? Are we a free people once you're conquered and subjugated? And we're going to see what the American Civil War did is it conquered and subjugated the American people, and that's what we're under today, and that's what I'm going to prove to you today. Well, let's just go by the international law that was at the time, Laws of Nations by Vattel. These are the laws that were recognized. This is what Abraham Lincoln recognized as his right to wage war. This is what the 39th Congress issued or uses its authority to pass the Reconstruction Acts, which we're going to go into in a little bit later. So this is Vattel, Laws of Nation. And let's just see what Mr. Vattel said. Because they said once the North, or once the South attacked the North at Fort Sumter, you couldn't go back, and that's the cause of the war. This is Laws of Nations, justifactory reasons and motives for making war. And we see here, force is a wretched and melancholy expedient against those who spurn at justice and refuse to listen to the remonstrances of reason. In other words, people who don't want to listen to justice, people who don't want to listen to, hey, let's talk this thing out. What did the South do? They sent peace commissioners to the North to try to go, hey, let's negotiate this thing out. Let's negotiate this out. And Washington, Abraham Lincoln, refused to listen to the peace commissioners. We're not even going to listen to you. We're not even going to talk to you guys. We're going to say that your ordinances of secession are null and void. They don't exist. They're not lawful. Got a question. And today, if you read modern history books, modern legal books, they'll say that the concept of secession was settled by the war. How many people anyone ever heard that? The issue of secession was settled by the American Civil War. Is that how a people who are we a government of laws or a government of men? We're a government of laws. Well, do you make laws and change laws by war or consent, due process, amending the Constitution? So if America's foundation today says secession, leaving the Union, doing what the Soviet Union did, which we applauded, broke up to where all of a sudden you had free, independent states. We said that was great, but here in the United States, it's a crime. But the issue is, was secession a crime upon which Lincoln could wage a war? And the answer is absolutely not. And that according to the laws of war, you have to have justifiable reasons, and you have got to not spurn justice and not listen, and you have to listen to the remonstrances. Listen to why we got to settle this. We got to do this diplomatically. Well, let's just go to what happened. This is an actual transcript of, this is the peace commissioners out of South Carolina who are coming to Washington. This is under James Buchanan, who was the president immediately before Lincoln, December 9th, 1860, so it's right then. And they said, in compliance with our statement to you yesterday, and now South Carolina has seceded. Okay, so now they're communicating with Washington to how are we going to do this. In compliance with our statement to you yesterday, we now express to you our strong convictions that anybody of the people of the state of South Carolina will either attack or molest the United States forts in the harbor of Charleston, and believe not until an offer has been made through an accredited representative to negotiate for an amicable, which is a friendly agreement, of all matters between the state and the federal government, provided that no reinforcements shall be sent to those forts and their relative military status shall remain as at present. So in South Carolina, this is at the very beginning of December, they say, okay, we're not going to attack your forts, we're not going to do anything. You know, we want to have, through accredited representatives, we want to negotiate a friendly agreement of the matters between South Carolina and the federal government. Does that sound pretty extreme? That's pretty rational, okay? But when we're going to do this, we're not going to attack your forts, but think about it. South Carolina saying we're a foreign nation, and what's sitting in Charleston Harbor? A fort of another foreign nation. They could turn those guns right around, and all of a sudden, and so South Carolina says, we're not going to attack your forts, we're friends, but let's negotiate this thing out. And what did Abraham Lincoln do? Send them back. I'm not listening to you. We're not going to have an amicable agreement. In fact, let's go to some of the notes from the cabinet meeting of Mr. Abraham Lincoln. This is the notes of Salmon P. Chase Manhattan Bank. He became Secretary of Treasury, and then he became Supreme Court Justice during the war. It says, if war is to be the consequence of an attempt, now again, this is cabinet meeting notes. Opinion on Fort Sumter, March 29, 1861. Fort Sumter was fired on about 2.5 weeks after this. It says, if war is to be the consequence of an attempt to provision Fort Sumter, war will just as certainly result from an attempt to maintain possession of Fort Pickens. I am clearly in favor of maintaining Fort Pickens and just as clearly in favor of provisioning Fort Sumter. What's that say right there? If provisioning them is going to cause a war, I'm in favor of it. Okay? And they're not listening to the peace commissioners. And this is, right behind it, this is the actual notes I pulled out of archives of where he actually wrote it down. And this is the same note. He says, if that attempt be resisted by military force, Fort Sumter should be, in my judgment, reinforced. So if the attempt to resist by military force, Fort Sumter should be reinforced. So if they're going to resist by force, we should reinforce it. If war is to be the result, I perceive no reason why it may not be best begun in consequence of military resistance to the efforts of the administration to sustain troops of the Union stationed under the authority of the government of a fort of the Union in the ordinary course of service. So basically say, if war is to be the result, I have no reason, there's no reason why it should not be begun by the consequence of military resistance to the efforts of the administration to keep troops there. We're going to keep troops there. We're not going to recognize South Carolina as a foreign country. Now, was there any law that says a state could not secede from the Union? No. Was secession part of our history? Yes. What is secession? The formal leaving of an organization or an association. Did we secede from Great Britain with the Declaration of Independence? We're formally leaving with bloodshed. I've got another presentation that I think I did last time. You can look it up on the internet, where did we secede from going from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution? And the answer is yes. Our Constitution was founded upon the principle of secession. Look at the last article, because the last article of the Constitution says once 9 states adopt this new form of government, it becomes binding on those 9, whoever signs. Not binding on all. In fact, when the Constitution was put into place and the United States organized and George Washington was inaugurated president, and we went from the Articles to the Constitution, how many states were in the American Union? There were 13 under the Articles. How many were in the American Union when the United States, as we know it today, was founded under the Constitution? There were 11, because 2 states hadn't signed yet. The other 2 were seceded from. They left. They formally left. North Carolina was one of them. Rhode Island was the other. So secession is part of our history. Now, who does it look like is agitating for a war, and who is here trying to, through amicable agreement, negotiate no war? The South is trying to say no war. The North is saying, we're going to provoke a war here. We're going to do everything we can to start a war. Let's go back to Vitale. He says, this is under making war, the right of making war, when it is necessary for your defense. So you have a right to wage war when it's necessary for your defense. Now, if the United States government isn't looking at your peace people, and they come in and they say, we're going to take your fort, what direction could those guns turn as soon as they reinforce it? Did South Carolina have a right to defend themselves? Does everyone have a right to defend themselves? What are all those people out there showing us? We have a right to defend ourselves. The South had a right to defend themselves. This is a letter from the USS Baltic, April 19th, the day of Fort Sumter. This is a report of Captain G.F. Fox, U.S. agent on the expedition for relief of Fort Sumter. And he says, we arrived at Charleston the 12th instant at 3 a.m. and found only the Harriet Lane. These are ships' names. At 7 a.m., the Pawnee arrived. That's another warship. These are warships coming into Charleston. Okay? I stood in with the Baltic to execute my orders by offering in the first place to carry provisions to Fort Sumter. Nearing the bar, it was observed that the war had commenced. What's he saying? We've got 3 United States military vessels with a landing parties on them sitting in Charleston Harbor. We're getting ready to go to Fort Sumter, and what does South Carolina do? They commenced the war. They fired on Fort Sumter so it wouldn't be provisioned. Were they provoked? Do they have a right to defend themselves? I say absolutely yes. These are the ships that were in Fort Sumter. The Baltic, it had 200 troops of the 2nd United States Artillery. The Harriet Lane had a crew of 95, 1 4-inch gun, 1 9-inch gun, 2 8-inch guns, 24 howitzers. There's the Pocahontas, the Pawnee, the Powhatan. You can look at those. These are the ships that were either at Charleston or heading towards Charleston. The Armada to go start this war. Again, this is going back to the Fatale. What is in general a just cause of war? For your own defense. If the foundation or cause of every just war is injury either already done or threatened. You have a right to defend yourself if there's a threat. How many people would disagree with that? And again, we got the same thing, to avenge or prevent injury. These are all fatale. This is the international law of the time when Fort Sumter was fired on. And here's where we feel we should have a kindred spirit with our founders. This is Patrick Henry, his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. He says, Mr. President, it's natural to men to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of a number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. Well, here we are prepping. What do we got to provide for? I say we got to learn the truth. What happened in our history? Because this is the precedent set by the federal government that it could do anything it wanted to the states, and they just had to submit. And we're going to fast forward to the war. We're going to go to the end of the war, the Reconstruction Acts. How many people here are familiar with what the Reconstruction Acts did? How many people here think that it was meant to build structures and bridges and roads in the South again? It was a political reconstruction, which is what we're talking about. How do we unwind this political reconstruction? The war was over in 1865. Reconstruction Acts came out in 1867, 2 years after the war was over. Now let's just read the Reconstruction Acts. This is a copy of it. This is what Congress, what they did in 1867, 2 years after the war was over, is they just said 11 southern states no longer exist. Your political bodies are gone. And right here they says in the very first sentence, it says, whereas no legal state governments or adequate protection for life or property now exist in the rebel states of Virginia, and he says, and whereas it's necessary that peace and good order should be enforced in said state until loyal and Republican state government can be legally established. Loyal to what? Loyal to this usurpation of power. People would say, I don't see that as a problem, rather than people who are loyal to the law and the Constitution. And I want you to see here, see if you see anything that violates due process. This is Section 5 of the Reconstruction Acts. Basically what they're saying here is these states are nullified. Virginia, you're nullified. You're not a state anymore. You're a territory. But here's what you've got to do in order to be a state again. Because the state of Virginia that's in place today is not the original state of Virginia. Because here's what had to happen. It says, and when said state, by a vote of its legislature, now this is elected, now this is after they said that all the people who could vote in Virginia before, if you participated in the war, you're not allowed to vote. How many people you think in Virginia participated in the war who were original voters? But they said anybody, this is where the carpetbaggers, people from the north came down, all the freed slaves, everybody else could vote except anyone that participated in the war. And these are the people who are going to vote on this new Constitution if you didn't participate in the war. And it says, and when said state, by a vote of its legislature, elected under said Constitution, shall have adopted the amendment to the Constitution of the United States proposed by the 39th Congress and known as Article 14. This is the 14th Amendment. And when such article shall have become part of the Constitution of the United States, said state shall be declared entitled to representation. Here's what they did. We'll summarize that. Virginia, United States. We're going to change who can vote. We're going to select the people we want to vote in Virginia. Congress says. They've got to have a new Constitution. They've got to send it to us. We've got to ratify it and say, okay, now you're a state. Now, you got to bring up the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. You're required to ratify it, not a vote of conscience. Shall have adopted the amendment. Virginia, you're required to adopt the amendment. And not only that, it has to become part of the Constitution of the United States, and then you'll be declared to have representation in Congress. Is this the way we amend the Constitution? You annul the states that won't do it. Then you say the only way to come back into the Union is adopt this amendment. And you're going to see the 14th Amendment is the cause of all of America's ills, unconstitutional ills. Let's go back to our foundation. How many people believe the Constitution set up a limited form of federal government? So it's a limited form of government. Were we creating a nation or a federation? There's a big difference. Nowadays, those words are kind of blended. And there's a big thing. Are we creating a nation? Because a nation is one people. A federal union is several. You know, Virginians, South Carolinians, North Carolinians. In Europe, the European Union, you got Frenchmen, Italians, Brits, Germans, okay? So independent people. That's the way we were set up. That's a union. A nation would be if you're all one people, okay? This is Federalist 39. Federalist 39 by James Madison. This is the Federalist Papers. He says this, and look at this and see if this change may have happened. He says the idea of a national government involves in it, so a national government, nation of one versus a federal government, involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, but an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things so far as they are objects of lawful government. Among a people consolidated into one nation, this supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature. He goes on to say, in this relation, then, the proposed government under the Constitution of the United States cannot be deemed a national one, since its jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only. So what they're saying is, citizen-wise, we're not a nation. Your citizenship resides in your state. Because if your citizenship resided in the nation, then the nation would have an indefinite supremacy over all people. And this power would be consolidated in the national legislature, Congress. How many people feel that's what we've actually got today? Citizenship has been nationalized to where Congress has the authority over us. And James Madison was saying if that were to happen, they would have an indefinite supremacy over all people. And I'm here to tell you that's exactly what happened. This is a journal of the Committee of 15 on Reconstruction. So this is when they were going through the Reconstruction Acts. This is published by the United States government. They put speeches and talks and all the information they found. And here's what, on page 184 of this document, concerning committee member John Bingham, he says, as has been said, he particularly desired to have the civil rights of the individual put into the special keeping of the national government. And it is not too much to say that had it not been for his untiring efforts, the provision for nationalizing civil rights would not have found a place in the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is about nationalizing citizenship. And what happens when you nationalize citizenship? Congress has indefinite supremacy over all people, and it's vested in them, and they can decide what marriage is, they can decide what bathrooms you go to, and they can decide all that. Do people of Virginia get to decide that? No. The change happened here. And let's just go on further. Here's James G. Blaine. This is one of the radical Republicans in Maine, or in Congress. He was from Maine. And this is when the 14th Amendment was proposed, which is going to nationalize citizenship. He gave a speech in Skowhegan, Maine. He's talking to his constituents, and he says, and in making this extension of citizenship, we are not confining the breadth and scope of our efforts to the Negro. It is for the white man as well. We intend to make citizenship national. Can you get any clearer than that? He says again, and this is in his book that he wrote. He says, as the vicious theory of state rights have been constantly at enmity with the true spirit of nationality, the organic law of the Republic, that's the Constitution, should be so amended that no standing room for the heresy of state rights would be left. He says the first section of the Constitutional Amendment, 14th Amendment, which includes these invaluable provisions, is in fact a new charter of liberty to the citizens of the United States, is the utter destruction of the pestilent heresy of state rights, which constantly menace the prosperity and even the existence of the Republic, and is the formal bestowment of nationality upon the wise federal system. It's formal bestowment of nationality. He goes on. He wasn't done. He says, he's talking about these new states like Virginia, North Carolina, the reconstructed states, these new ones that came in. He says, all were ordained in the spirit of liberty, all prohibited the existence of any form of slavery. Slavery was abolished 3 years before this. And all heartily recognized the supreme sovereignty of the national government. That's a change. Our founders did not have this original intention. And he goes on. Its opening section, 14th Amendment, settled all conflicts and contradictions on this question. Where does your citizenship come from? Does it come from your state or does it come from the national government? That's the question. By a comprehensive declaration which defined national citizenship and gave to it precedence of the citizenship of a state. And this is a quote from the 14th Amendment, first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. These pregnant words distinctly reversed the origin and character of American citizenship. Instead of a man being a citizen of the United States because he was a citizen of one of the states, which is how it was originally set up, he is now made a citizen of any state in which he might choose to reside because he was antecedently a citizen of the United States. The consequences that flowed from this radical change in the basis of citizenship are numerous and weighty. Did they recognize what they were doing when they passed this? Absolutely. Did it go to the United States Supreme Court? Absolutely. State of Georgia went to the Supreme Court. Here's what the Supreme Court said. A bill to restrain the defendants who represent the executive authority of the government from carrying into execution certain acts of Congress, inasmuch as such execution would annul and totally abolish the existing state government of Georgia, is not within the jurisdiction of the court. And then we go to another case, Ex parte McCardle. I want you to really pay attention to this. You can't make this stuff up. Oh, let me just ask a question. How many people have heard any of this stuff before? You've been to my seminar, I guess. Okay, well, here's the problem. The Reconstruction Acts were considered unconstitutional. President of the United States, Andrew Johnson, vetoed them. But Congress had a supermajority, and they passed it over his veto. And for the president to veto it, he already had to go through the Attorney General to give him the legal opinion on why it was unconstitutional. He shouldn't pass it. Well, who defends the United States against any actions against it? The Attorney General. Well, in McCardle case, this is the editor in Mississippi who wrote a paper saying all this stuff is garbage, you know, Reconstruction and all that, don't participate in this new constitutional convention. They arrested him under the Reconstruction Acts. And so now the Attorney General was supposed to defend the United States, right, on this act. The Attorney General was Henry Stanberry. And this is an article out of the New York Times. And he says he had, Stanberry, in accordance with his convictions, answered the president that the Reconstruction Acts were illegal and void and had advised the president not to approve them. This being his opinion, he could not, of course, take the other side of the question. Therefore, he had declined to argue it here. He left it to be argued by those who believed in the doctrine. He had given notice to General Grant, in consequence of which other counsel had been employed. The Attorney General says, I don't believe they're constitutional. You need to find someone who believes it. I don't. Go hire a lawyer. And to defend this case, the United States Congress hired a lawyer, a private lawyer who was a sitting senator from Illinois. Who defended McCardle? This is who defended McCardle. Jeremiah Black. So he's defending the side saying Reconstruction was unconstitutional, and I'm going to prove it. What are his credentials? Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court from 1851 to 55, United States Attorney General from 57 to 1860, United States Secretary of State from 60 to 61. Does this guy know the law? Yes. He's saying Reconstruction's unconstitutional. He says this is in his argument to the Supreme Court. A state election was going on in which this was superintended entirely by the Army, which by means of bayonets drove one set of voters to the polls and drove another away from them. The whole thing was accomplished by naked terrorism, and when an unarmed and peaceable man expressed his opposition to such proceeding through his own newspaper, he was told he should not do so and was ordered into custody. He was arrested. Which of the two parties was guilty of intimidation, the accused or the accuser? It was said McCardle hindered Reconstruction. Congress desired that a certain constitution or form of government should be adopted and submitted to the people for their decision, or it was submitted to a portion only of the people of Mississippi. The act of Congress made a show for the expression of approbation, approval, or disapprobation. McCardle was not among those who were in favor of the Constitution and was said to be hindering Reconstruction, the commission of a crime which there was a right to punish. That's why he was arrested. These acts of Congress admitted no shade of ambiguity. They were intended to deny the regular administration of justice to one section of the country. If these acts were valid, then the trial by jury was abolished in 10 states of the Union and might be abolished in all the remainder when Congress might think proper. There was no chance of the people escaping from the body of this death except by saying that Reconstruction Acts are null and void. And he says, no person engaged in the exercise of power can ever perform anything valid unless he keeps himself within the limit of the grant. The agent cannot bind the principal beyond the scope of his authority. The corporation, which acts outside the charter, can do nothing that is valid. This, be it remembered, is not mercy, it's a rule of jurisprudence. And he says, if it appeals to public justice entrusted with the supreme power of the state, there never has been and never will be any limited government to which it does not apply. Who defended the lawfulness of the Reconstruction Acts? Lyman Trumbull, Senator Trumbull. And he basically says that the Reconstruction Acts, the Supreme Court didn't have jurisdiction to make a ruling on that case. And he basically said he's gone over substantially over the ground which he intended to occupy. The proposition which I have endeavored to maintain are first, that the court has no jurisdiction over the case, so he never argued they were lawful and constitutional. So what ended up happening? Well, these are congressmen. They went from the Supreme Court across the street. The case was argued before the Supreme Court, and they passed a law and took away the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to make a ruling on the case. Only case in United States history this has ever happened. And this is the case that nationalized citizenship and centralized all power in Washington. Let's just go over a couple things. But he got busted because now he's trying to pass that law, and he says this. He's trying to pass this law that's going to take away the Supreme Court's ability to make a ruling on the case. He says, in my judgment, there is no such great importance to be attached to this law. It's a bill of very little importance in my judgment, and I wish to say to the senator from Maryland that the Supreme Court has not decided that any case is pending before it under the Act of February 5th, 1867. No such decision has been made, nor do I believe any such decision would be made. So he's saying there's not even a case. He argued it. And he's saying there's no case it's going to affect. He says, now there is no such case as pending in the Supreme Court. Well, he gets called out by Senator Doolittle out of Wisconsin. He says, Mr. President, my honorable friend from Illinois seems to think that there is no importance in this measure, that it affects nothing and nobody, that there is no case pending in the Supreme Court which this act will affect. That is a mistake and a delusion on our part to suppose that there is any such case there under the law of 1867. Well, sir, if he be correct, why the great haste in pressing this bill? And he says, I apprehend that the honorable senator from Illinois is altogether mistaken in his view, which he now presents, that this is a very important measure, that there is a very important case pending in the Supreme Court under which the act is now proposed to be repealed. The honorable senator himself, as counsel in the court, he's calling him out. You were counsel in the court, if I am correctly informed, with other counsel, made a motion to dismiss a case pending in the Supreme Court or alleged to be pending under this act, and the court refused to dismiss it. He says, we all know, the whole world knows that this case of McCardle is pending in the Supreme Court, brought up on appeal under the Act of 1867 from the Circuit Court of Mississippi, and this case has been argued by eminent counsel, and that it is pending. It is important because the case involves the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts. And basically, what ends up happening with this, and I can give you more, where he just slams the guy, is Congress passed a law took away the Supreme Court's jurisdiction, the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts and the war have never been addressed. Even in the Raleigh News and Observer, was the constitutionality of the war addressed? No. It was only, most people think it was necessary. But this is a modern book, modern law book, a landmark case of the Supreme Court. And here's what it says about this law, the Ex parte McCardle case. It says, while the case was under advisement, Congress passed an act taking away the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court as defined by the Act of February 1867 in cases of habeas corpus, and the appeal was therefore dismissed for want of jurisdiction. McCardle was thereupon discharged, and no further attempt has been made to test the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Acts. That's what we're about. Let's get us back on our political foundation. Let's find out where it went. Where did Congress get all the power over our daily lives, all the way down to the point of what bathroom we can go into in every state? Because the states wouldn't pass it. But Congress is forcing it down, and it comes from this. And this is what I'm trying to get people excited about. Know your history. Know what happened, because if you know what happened, now you have the ability to get people together and to fix it. And that's what we're trying to do, is mobilize Virginia. Get people enthusiastic to say, this is wrong. Or you can say, I'm just going to go home and pretend it didn't happen. I'm just going to. No. We need to stand up like our founders did. We need to do what other people are doing in our country, trying to take our country from us. We need to get excited, passionate. Let's get our country back again.
A big hand here. So, who heard some things for the first time today? Some of these things were maybe a little bit new. Yeah. Hopefully, education leads to action. Just a quick question for you: is this information upsetting? What they did? Is it frustrating? Are the effects that we're seeing today frustrating as a result? Can they be animating to do something else? Is there remedy beyond frustration? What gives an unconstitutional act power? Acquiescence. Yeah, that's a great answer. Obedience. This is the order of law. This is the origins of law in America. Originally, we had God at the top. We recognized him as the top, where all law comes from. We had state citizens, which created states, each unique, okay? Each citizenry was unique to their state. They made decisions within their state specific to that. The federal government could not come in and dictate to the states what was going to happen. That was unheard of, unless you dealt with international trade or economics or war, international war, things like that. That didn't come into play. State citizens and states, and then you had the federal. Well, who's on the bottom? The federal government. With Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment, the arrangement flips itself completely over. So now the federal government's on the top, the states are underneath. State citizens are no more. They're now nationalized U.S. citizens, and we just want to do away with God. Our participation in this venue, the way that it's currently set up, is revolution against what our founders put into place. So what's the answer to revolution? Okay. Well, let's look at it this way. Okay, so this is the current arrangement. National U.S. citizens. We've got the same type of citizens. Notice each little dot. Okay, these are supposed to be my little representation of citizens, right? So each little gray dot is a citizen. Are they all different colors of citizens, or are they all pretty much the same in every state? Well, what's a state? A state's supposed to be a people. A people. But what's happened here? All the people are the same. United States citizens. It's normally kind of a term that we're proud of. I'm a United States citizen. Prior to the war, it was a little different. Prior to the war, it was a federal union. So we're still together. We're proud to be Americans. But each citizen is loyal to their state. It's a loyalty. It's an oath of allegiance, a loyalty to each state individually. So now you're seeing how some of the things that we're seeing coming out now can actually happen. So a counter-revolution is going from this back to that, countering the revolution that we're participating in currently. Because state rights is America's pressure release valve. I've never seen it so heavy, arguing with family members about politics, and I've heard of people getting family members, kicking out family members and things, it's getting crazy, just people talking to me at the booth out here, man, we're up against it, we're fighting our own neighbors, over things. Well, if we're each individual and the states are sovereign again, we can kind of do our own thing a little bit more. Let's get back to that. So let me give you a little bit of a case study. We're going to look at North Carolina, okay? We're from North Carolina. John's from Charlotte. So this is what we saw here. North Carolina, and the same does apply to every state, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But North Carolina, November 21st, 1789, the 12th state to enter the American Union, and it entered for the free people of North Carolina. This is who the state was ordained for, the freemen or free people of North Carolina. That's actually the wording from the original state constitution. Now, this is the flag that we see flying in Raleigh. June 25th, 1868 is when it entered. This is, remember, Reconstruction started in 1867. The first Reconstruction Acts were passed. June 25th, 1868, a new state called North Carolina. We're always hearing, well, the states re-entered the Union after the war. It wasn't a re-entering. This was the creation of a new body politic. Look, 39th state to enter the American Union by Congress under Military Order number 120, issued by General Canby, via Reconstruction. Who's it created for? For U.S. citizens residing in North Carolina. So for people residing in this area, they're U.S. citizens, just like the citizens in California, just like the citizens in South Carolina, same citizenry. So this is a new body politic than this. These are not the same states. And these are legal terms, de jure and de facto. De jure is of law. This is of consent by the people, the original lawful state. De facto, it means of fact. In other words, it's actually in existence. It's really here. This is a state that most people recognize. It is a state, but not necessarily lawful and of consent by the people. So, in 1997, we reestablished North Carolina. And now we're going to go just a little, stretch your mind just a little bit further. So what is reestablishing a state? What is that? Well, it's exactly what we're saying we're doing. We're reestablishing the original state, the body politic of North Carolina, as composed of state citizens. This is our Declaration of Reestablishment. And this was composed in 1997. It's drafted sort of like the Declaration of Independence, think something like that. This is out of the box, out of the box. There's some signatures at the bottom. And we're not going to get real deep into this, but I just want to show you, just read a few lines of this so you get an idea of what we did. We, the inhabitants of North Carolina, know it is our duty and our right to reestablish North Carolina and set an example for the nation to witness the reestablishment of a republic, a free, sovereign people, peacefully, openly, without violence, in a manner never before seen in history. So we gave notice. This was sent to President Bill Clinton and Governor Jim Hunt at the time, right? Very interesting dialogue that happened after that was sent. Yeah.
I've got stories.
Stories, they go, yes. We reestablished under the pre-Reconstruction Constitution, which is the December 18th, 1776 Constitution. I'm just going to breeze through these. We do hold regular elections in our de jure state. We have taxes, treasury, officers and representatives, and we have regular public meetings, and we have citizens around the state. How many knew that there were citizens in, let's see how I phrase this right, citizens in North Carolina who are citizens of the original reestablished state of North Carolina? How many people knew that or had ever heard anything like that? These are our court cases. We've been in every level of the judicial system in North Carolina, all the way up. They go on. We've got a big list of things here, and more happening regularly. These are some of the ones that you can find on the website. But basically challenging the existence of this state created by Reconstruction and the nationalization of citizenship. So let's get away from this for a second. what's our end goal here? Is our goal to get a ruling? Are we going to go into court and they're going to say, oh yeah, you guys are right, Reconstruction, the Civil War was totally unlawful, here are the keys, you know? No, that's not really our goal. Our goal is to get awareness, first of all. Let's get awareness. Let's show people what happened here. We want to make Reconstruction, national citizenship, we want to make these things a hot button topic. These are a few of our little yard signs that we injudicial tyranny. This is me over here, but these are my arms. Support state citizenship, get off the plantation. That's a rather fun one I like to put up there sometimes. Lawful states. So what's your end game? One guy asked at one of our presentations, what's your end game? He was yelling it out, so I wanted to put that question right there. What is our end game? I'm glad you asked. Reestablish the states. That's ultimately our end game, is to see every state reestablish. It's wild. It's grassroots. It's not voting. So we had a webcast at one time, and we did get interest from 13 different states in reestablishing the states. Spoke to individuals in these states. And it is applicable to every state. And here I've got one highlighted. There's Virginia in the first category. There's 3 categories of states that were reconstructed. The first ones were directly by military force. The next ones were by the adoption of the 14th Amendment. And these other states on the right entered post-Reconstruction, or rather adopted 14th by, this was after this occurred. And they are no longer on equal footing with their original sister states. So I want to tell you a little bit more about Reestablish the States in a little while. But the first thing that we do before we can get to any of this, reestablishing the states, we need to build our base of knowledgeable people. We need educators, allies, and supporters. We need to focus on education, first of all. So you guys are here. You've heard all of this. Where do you go from here? Well, I want you to think, and also Jill, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and getting those passed out. Jill's got some resource packets for you that she's going to hand out. You just take one, pass that down if you would. And go ahead and hand that too. If you want to, you can start at the other end. And she's also got a board that maybe we'd like to keep up with you if we could. So what are your gifts? What are you good at? Maybe you're great at hospitality. You know, maybe you would like to host an informal gathering at your house or your business or somewhere. I always like to joke about it. John has a little hybrid car, and he'll travel to wherever you are, give a presentation. Do people need to know this stuff? Is knowledge good to have? Yeah. So, you know, maybe that's your gift. Maybe your gift is teaching. And maybe you could help us. Maybe you could help us teach better. Maybe there's a better way to say this. Maybe there's something that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a parent teacher. Maybe you're a homeschool. Okay, maybe you're into homeschool. Maybe you go to the homeschool conventions or something like that. Maybe you can help us with that, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Maybe you're a business that can donate. Maybe you're maybe you're able to promote or maybe write. Phone calls is a great one. We really struggle with following up with folks. So if you just want to make phone calls and you know, talk to folks, maybe that would be something else. Organization, technology, there's lots of ways that you can participate. So what's our future roadmap look like? Well, one thing that we want to do is we want to develop a homeschool curriculum. This is something that we're working on currently. We would love to be able to unveil a curriculum with this information in it at the North Carolinians for Home Education. Anybody here homeschooled or have homeschoolers? Yeah. My wife was homeschooled, and I think she's a little brighter than I am at times. Probably most of the time. We want to further develop our educational materials, printed materials, a book we've been working on. Overall, we want to see the remedy spread in every state. And that brings me to the resource guide you've got in front of you here. Basically, I assembled this to just give you a quick rundown of a lot of the stuff that we have at our table. There's some stuff online. If you flip the whole thing over on the back, there are several online resources there, including our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and there's 3 little videos listed at the top that I kind of recommended. They're short, kind of short, medium, long. Those are really good for if you're trying, usually what happens, you'll start learning this stuff and you'll want to explain it to someone. Well, it was about nationalization, it was Reconstruction. If you watch these videos several times and you share these videos, it makes it a lot easier. And the more you study, the more you'll start to remember it and be able to recall it for your friends. And John, did you want to do Q&A now or at the table? How did you want to handle that?
We can do a little bit of Q&A here. I don't want to spend a bunch of time. I know people want to get back out and see what's out there.
So let's go ahead and wrap up the presentation first.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of take an informal Q&A. If you want to head out, you can. We won't hold you here. Won't hold it against you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. And thank you, John.
I believe that for Americans to survive and to thrive is we have to get on a lawful foundation. We got to get back on the Constitution. We're either a nation of laws or we're a nation of men. Right now, these guys make up the laws. This political stuff's being forced down our throats in the states, and we can do nothing about it. And the issue is, well, how did they get the power? I just showed you. The key is, are you going to accept this? There's nothing we can do about it. Water under the bridge. Or, I live in the mountains. I live in a little enclave. It won't come to us. In other words, I'm going to do nothing, and I'm going to hand it off to my children and my grandchildren. Is that what our founders did? Now, let's get enthusiastic. If we can get as enthusiastic as those people that march in Washington about every 6 months, we can have this country back by the end of the year. I guarantee it. And we just need to get people enthusiastic and involved and getting involved and, hey, I want to get America back, rather than I just need to get prepared because I've given up. And I'm trying to get people out of the give up mode into the hopeful mode. There's hope. An unconstitutional act is not a law. You don't have to obey it. So let's not obey them, but let's put lawfulness back in place. You've got to do that. And just one other thing is, boy, I've been married for 33 years. I've done this whole thing through marriage and raising children. My wife's right there. She's got equal stories of thinking I'm like, John, this is kind of weird. And it was a strain. It was a strain. But how do you turn your back on what you know to be true after you learn it? Once you say, this is what happened, how do you turn your back on it? My wife's, So, I want people involved, and I also want to answer your questions. Yes, sir?
I have a question, if it's all right. If the executive branch was against this, who's the brainchild behind the whole thing?
The radical Republicans is a phrase that was used. If you know anything about the Republican Party was founded in like 1854, and they had the presidency in 1860. Lincoln was elected in 60, became president in 61. So it was the Republican Party originally. Originally, the Democrat Party was the limited federal government and against all this. This was pretty much 100% down party lines, Democrats and Republicans of this time frame. Now, the Republicans and Democrats have switched roles, but again, we're not about voting or anything of that nature. What was your question again? I have no.
Who's the brainchild?
Oh, the brainchild. The people here, you're going to find, the Charles Sumners, the Fessendens, the Thaddeus Stevens. These are just Americans. I don't think this came from Europe, the Bilderbergers or anything like that. It was just, what is the natural tendency of all governments and people in government? Get more power. They were just following the natural tendency, but we have a system of checks and balances. And what the Republicans had was they had a supermajority in Congress to where every time the president vetoed all these acts. And they were overridden because they had the 2/3 majority, the Republicans. So they overrode it all. So going by parliamentary procedure, everything's done lawfully. But using parliamentary procedure, you still can't pass an unconstitutional act. Through parliamentary procedure, you can pass disgusting acts, but not unconstitutional acts. So just because, and there's no statute of limitations on unconstitutional act, we still have a right to fix this. And it's great, and I love it. Second question.
Federalism.
Federalism.
But, it's also important for our security, for our strength. So, you know, I agree with everything you're saying here, but at what point do you still got to say we still need a strong federal government for our defense and for our...
Oh, no. Yeah. Oh, no, great question. No, we're 100%, but that's like saying our founders didn't put that in place already. You know, that's Article 1, Section 8. Congress's powers and authorities, the limited form of government is to have an army, have the forts, but also, you know, get the mail running, interstate commerce, you know, the limited forms. You know, so we still had that, but think of it again, more like a NATO or a European Union. You know, we're involved in NATO for protection with other foreign countries, but NATO doesn't control us in Virginia or North Carolina. They don't pass laws over us, and that's the difference. Is when our founders put Washington in place, it was supposed to be more like a NATO. Okay, you're out there limited. You guys got these limited powers. You don't have any control over us in our daily lives. And by nationalizing citizenship, they flipped it to where they have total control over our lives. And our forefathers, I'm glad James Madison wrote that down in Federalist 39, because they saw it coming. You know, this is not what you want. This is not what we're setting up. But that's what, you know, Lincoln and the 39th Congress all did. Yes, sir.
You had, there was a slide up there with 3 different groups of states.
Right.
The first group, second, and the last one.
Right.
The last group approved what we currently have. Is that correct? Am I looking at it right? Because they came in and they signed.
Did they participate in a fraud and an unconstitutional act and become co-conspirators in an unconstitutional act? Yeah. But did they know it? No. But so what you got to do, and correct me if I steer in the wrong direction here, but according to the Northwest Ordinance, which is the ordinance was one of the first ordinances passed under the Continental Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, and it was one of the ones that was transferred immediately over to the new form of government under the Constitution. And that's the one that says when new states come in, they have to come in on equal footing with the original 13. Those states have came in as nationalized states. They did not come in on equal footing with the original 13, so they therefore violate that.
So they're not part of our government, right? They should not be.
Which mean, well, stop. You said our government. Who's ours?
The federal government.
Yours? No, but again, what we're saying is the state of Virginia is not legitimate, just like they aren't. So what really needs to happen is Virginia needs to reestablish, recognize, see what the legal principle under which we operate is, in law you have to have an injured party. Who is injured by Reconstruction Acts? The states. Are those states in existence anymore? Is there any injured party to the Reconstruction Acts? No. Can anybody bring it to court and challenge it? Only if you reestablish and say we're an injured party. So we said we're going to recognize the original state of North Carolina. What we're trying to do is get people in Virginia to say we recognize the original state of Virginia, the original Constitution, because it was never changed by the consent of the free people of Virginia. We're going to recognize that as lawful. And it's not going to be the same Virginia that's meeting in Richmond right now. It's it's with our body politic, not their body politic. Think of this, where's a good example? France, when the Germans took over France. Okay, they put it in the Vichy government, the Nazi sympathizing government in France. Okay, so this was put in by, as a puppet government put in by the occupiers. Well, when the war was over, World War II was over, was that government recognized as legitimate? Or did Free French and the underground and de Gaulle put in place as the Free French government? Just because they're saying we're the government doesn't mean they're the legitimate government. They're the legitimate body of people, because their loyalty, who was the Vichy government's loyalty to? Berlin, primarily. Who was the loyalty of the Free French people? The Free French people of France. And right now, we've got the people, the United States citizens, your loyalty, your oath. If you look at a Virginia voter registration application, I can pretty much guarantee, it's in virtually every state I've seen, you're required to swear under oath, under penalty of perjury, that you're a United States citizen. Nowhere on a Virginia voter registration does it say, are you a citizen of Virginia? Okay, so you're a United States citizen. You're swearing and you're giving your oath, legal binding oath, that you recognize Reconstruction. You recognize the nationalization of citizenship, and you are one. And we say, I don't. I'm a North Carolinian.
Okay, But if you refuse to sign them on paper, you're not allowed to vote.
Right. Why would you? If you're in France, do you want to vote for the Free French government or the Vichy government?
Okay, fine. How are we going to make changes to get us back to the original? Once everyone is fully knowledgeable about this, how do we
This-
make changes?
This is exactly what Cliff brought up. Is number one is you got to find people who want the change, who believe in the change, who are passionate about the change, and they get together and they say, we want to do this? Well, yeah. Okay, well, what are we doing? Well, I'm going to give my oath of allegiance, because in every war, what is it they want you to do? Have an oath of allegiance to whoever the new occupier is. You know, in the Civil War, they had the oaths. You always have the oaths. Who's your loyalty to? I need to know. And the issue is your loyalty to Washington and what they did with Reconstruction and the war, conquering and subjugating all the American people, or are you saying that's unconstitutional? My allegiance is to the original state of Virginia, to those laws, never changed by the consent. And it's not composed of United States citizens subject to Washington. It's Virginians. And so what you're doing is, and so they're going to be here, big, strong, in place Virginia. You're going to be this little grassroots group. And you're going to stay a grassroots group until people start saying, hey, that's right. That's why what Cliff said. We want to start educating people. You want to get your friends. You want to start getting people involved because we want to grow this. It would be totally reckless to say for them to just go away and 18 people go in there and say, we're going to run the state now. That is not what we're proposing.
We have to get a majority of the voting population to support this.
Okay, I'll ask one question. If something's declared unconstitutional, you have to have a majority to have an unconstitutional act declared unconstitutional. Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade. How many people were involved in getting all those anti-abortion laws struck down? How many people? Murray versus Curlette, saying we're going to take prayer out of school in all schools in the United States. Madeline Murray O'Hare. How many people? Was it a majority who said we want prayer out of our schools? Or was it one person operating under the 14th Amendment because Murray versus Curlette was supported by, it was a violation of the 14th Amendment, is what the official Supreme Court ruling said. Same thing with abortion, Roe versus Wade, they're violations of the 14th Amendment. Stone versus Graham, taking away the display of the Ten Commandments, a violation of the 14th Amendment. Lawrence versus Texas, which said sodomy is legitimate and lawful, was a violation of the 14th Amendment. All these things are federal government saying, through our power, we're going to decide what rights people can have, and we're going to.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I fully agree with that and accept that. My concern is I can't see the path to make the change after we educate the people, because they've had 100 years, 150 years
Right.
of educating everyone to accept this unconstitutional garbage.
I got a couple directions to go in that. How long did it take the United States to go from, you know, homosexuality was a crime to gay marriage is legitimate? Took passionate people who say, this is what we're demanding, this is what we want, we're not taking no for an answer. The issue is, and that's what I'm saying, you've got to have passionate people. I'm looking for passionate people. Now, let me finish. Okay. Our founding fathers. What government was in place when they got started? Did they have a majority of the people? No, they said, we're seceding from you. The Declaration of Independence was, as a legal document, was an indictment and notice. It was an indictment of the crimes of the crown. You committed this crime, this crime, this crime. The function of government under the British common law is all government of rights comes from the consent of the people, and the function of government is reciprocal. It's supposed to guarantee and protect the rights of the people. In return, the people give it allegiance and support. Okay? If the crown commits crimes, and our founding father says we brought remonstrances, we come to you, we try to get this thing, and we're just met with more abuses, you have violated this relationship. You are no longer guaranteeing and protecting our rights. You're actually abusing us. Therefore, you violated this agreement, and we are and of right ought to be a free and independent people. We've got to learn what the law is and use it to our advantage. The law's in our favor. It's absolutely in our favor. The issue is whether I want to have reasons for it not to be in my favor, or whether I want to say, you know, hey, I'm kind of done with this. I think we need to get America back. Everybody else is fighting for it. Everybody's fighting to control America except the people where everything was taken away from. Everyone else is. You know, how long did it take, you know, the illegal immigrant population? You know, they said, we're not going to have any political power in the United States. We're too small. And all of a sudden now they got free education, they're getting welfare, they're getting housing, they're getting everything. Because they wouldn't take no for an answer, and they kept going. When are we going to say, I'm not taking no for an answer, let's get going? That's all it is. It's just, it's we've got these artificial cinder blocks in front of us. They're not there. Let's explore it, man. Let's take America back. I think it's worth fighting for. I've got children. Yes, ma'am.
So North Carolina has been reestablished.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done through your efforts in getting people in that state to know what you told us here. So if Virginia, I saw that there's some interest from South Boston in Virginia. So if we get a group of people that are truly interested to do this, what are the resources available? Like, you guys have done it, you would help us to know how to, like, I think the pathway he's talking about is where do we go from here?
Well, here's what I'm going to say. I can tell you what we did, and I believe what we did was great and lawful and the right and everything, but could there possibly be more innovative ways to do it? I think clearly. I'm not going to limit it to what we did. Right. I'm going to say, man, you guys could have some really great ideas. We will do everything we can to support you. And we've got resources, because once you learn this and you learn how law works, you know, you have remedy in law. Anytime there's an injury in law, you have remedy. You have recourse. If there's an injury, in Reconstruction, annulling the original states, the original body politics, is the injury, but there's nobody occupying the lawful spot to say now we're an injured person. And that's what we're saying. We've got to occupy the lawful spot just to bring the legal argument into play.
Second question, we purchased your DVD. Do we need a license to show this, or is it, will we just show it to groups?
Just don't make money off of it, yeah. If you do make money, you know, send me a cut. No, I mean, no, this is, we're education. Believe me, I am not making money at this.
He's fairly lenient on his, you know, we try to put, you know, little copyright notices and things on things just like everybody else, but,
No,
but John's pretty lenient, and he wants it definitely, if there are other people that want to be the teachers, John would encourage.
Yeah, we're about education, because, you know, the victor writes the history, and they don't tell us, they don't tell us Fort Sumter was Washington picking a war, starting a war. They knew they were going to start a war, and they were desirous of a war. They say, South Carolina fired on Fort Sumter. What were we to do? Excuse me. The Soviets or somebody shot down Flight 007 with a U.S. congressman on it back in the 80s. We didn't sit there and say, okay, now we need to own Moscow. Just because there's a little skirmish doesn't give you the right to totally conquer a people and subjugate them because, you know, they fired at some fort somewhere. And I've got all sorts of information on what legal premises they have. In fact, Jeremiah Black wrote a really good the opinion of the Attorney General in 1860 under Buchanan of what the rights of the federal government had with South Carolina seceding. And they said, we can't really do anything. And so Buchanan didn't do anything, and Lincoln said, you know what, I think there's plenty I can do. I'm not a big Lincoln fan, if anybody wants to know. I got all sorts of reasons. I'll give you a whole seminar, and I'll have you equally despising the man in it's probably as little as 45 minutes. Yes, sir.
I'll ask you.
Okay, I got the one behind you.
Just kind of tying in there, what's next in North Carolina? You know, the 1997 document, disassociation, all the law, the courts of law you've been through. Are you still pushing that? Do you want that to end up at the Supreme Court?
We've gotten a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court in 2012. 2012, we got a case all the way to the United States Supreme Court on this. They accepted it.
This year marks the 150th anniversary of Reconstruction.
Oh, yeah, 1867. So we got it to the Supreme Court, and they accepted it, and then they declined to hear it. Try it again. But see, think about this. So one of our things is for these states, Virginia, for example. I'm here to tell you, I'll give someone $10,000 if you can prove to me the state of Virginia that's in place now was lawfully and constitutionally put into place by the free will of the people of Virginia. Real dollars, okay? Because it's not. It's not, okay? You'll have people saying, well, we think the war was necessary and all this stuff. It's not lawful and constitutional. What did Cliff say? What makes an unconstitutional act operate? What gives it power? You obeying it, saying, I don't recognize it as not being constitutional. That's what gives it power, is you being a participant in Reconstruction. You being a participant in your own national demise. You being a participant is what gives an unconstitutional act power.
So next steps, John. Next steps.
Next steps are, what, in Virginia?
So next steps as far as our state goes.
Oh, our state. Well, number one is we're about education. We don't run from them. I've lived in the same house in Charlotte for over 30 years. Okay, so it's not like I'm moving around and I'm afraid of these people. They know who I am. They know what I do. I've had talks with the FBI. I've had talks with government officials, and I got lots of stories. But like Cliff said, our goal is not to get a ruling. Our goal is to get people. Because if we go into the cases, because here's an issue, and I'll go ahead and say this, I haven't had a driver's license in over 20 years in North Carolina because I don't recognize that state as having the authority to say I've got to have one. They're not lawfully created. So my issue when I go into court is I will get a license if you can prove you're a lawfully created state. And by the way, here's my brief on the war, Reconstruction, and why you're unconstitutional and unlawful, and I have a right to recognize the original state as being legitimate. I have not been convicted of having a license. I haven't been thrown in jail for more than 6 hours. In other words, they haven't sentenced me to jail or anything. 20 years, again, to my wife's willing approval. Yeah. You think that might cause stress in life? Yes. And she's been great. My wife has been great. She does. Well, we don't want everybody. This is a fight, and you got to pick and choose your battles. And I'm not asking people not to have a driver's license. It's how do you challenge the system? How do you get it in? How do you sit there to make it a public spotlight that they can't ignore? Because we're dealing with due process of law. Due process says, if I say you're not a lawfully created state and I got enough evidence to show it, due process of law says you got to settle this. And they're saying we don't have to settle it. And that's basically their position. But if we had 10,000 people, 20,000 people outside the Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, I know y'all have one up here too, courthouse with someone going in there for not having a driver's license or getting a speeding ticket or jaywalking ticket or whatever, prove you're lawful. Answer him. Don't just run over it. And people saying, we demand you prove you're a lawful state. How many times does the state of North Carolina or the state of Virginia need to prove it's lawfully created? How many times does it need to do that? Once. And they can't. I had one judge says, we're not going to spend the valuable resources of the state of North Carolina to answer Mr. Ainsworth. Proving you're lawfully created? Now, the only reason it would take a lot of resources is trying to make something unlawful appear lawful. Because all it is it's a pedigree. It's just like, okay, the crown transfer right of the soil of Virginia to the freemen of Virginia, organized under the Constitution of Virginia of 1776. Then they go to 1861, then they go to 1867, and that Constitution's put aside. A new group of people is created, and a new state of Virginia comes in, and we're saying, and they're saying, well, Virginia was just readmitted. It's the same as that one. And we're going, I don't think it is. This one's composed of people subject to Congress. That one's composed of people subject to Virginians. Not the same group of people. Just because it looks bad, I'm going to say my loyalty's over here. My oath of allegiance is to the original state of Virginia. While this big old monster is operating out there, I'm over here. Now, if you can prove to me that that transition of 1860 to 1868 was lawful, I'm on board with you. They can't do it.
You'll go ahead and take the rest of the questions at the table?
I'll go, yeah, we'll go to the booth. We'll let the next group come in. And appreciate everybody for coming. These enthusiastic people. Let's do it. Let's get this country back. Appreciate you guys coming.